This is the Fox News Alert. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Breaking news tonight on the House Intelligence Committee's investigation into the unmasking of Americans swept up in government surveillance. There are two tracks to the investigation into what the Trump campaign did or didn't do, and also what the Obama administration did or did not do with surveillance. Breaking tonight, new details on the second track. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is here with those details. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. Fox News has confirmed that the FBI and CIA and the National Security Agency were all served today with subpoenas issued by the House Intelligence Committee. Sources said each of these subpoenas referenced unmasking and each named as figures of interest 3 senior Obama-era officials. Former White House National Security Advisor Susan Rice was identified by multiple news organizations last month as someone who requested that names of Trump associates that had appeared in coded form in classified intelligence reports be identified for her or unmasked. Rice at the time denied wrongdoing and told us today through a spokesperson that she is unaware of any subpoenas, quote, directed at her. Former CIA Director John Brennan was also named on the subpoenas. In testimony last week, Brennan decried the leaks of classified information that have bedeviled the Trump administration and which some believe was linked to the unmasking activity. Brennan declined our request for comment. Most noteworthy was the subpoena's naming of Samantha Power. The former UN ambassador has not previously surfaced in the unmasking controversy. A Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Power served in Barack Obama's Senate office before joining his administration. House investigators told Fox News they are now devoting greater scrutiny to Power because they have come to see her role in the unmasking as larger than previously known, allegedly eclipsing the others named. Contacted by Fox News today, Power declined to comment. Today's disclosures about Samantha Power may explain a somewhat cryptic exchange that occurred at the Brennan hearing last week, initiated by Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina.
Do you recall any U.S. ambassadors asking that names be unmasked?
I don't know. Maybe it's ringing a vague bell, but I could not answer with any confidence.
Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, Republican of California, seen at screen left, signed a total of 7 subpoenas. The other 4 were at the behest of ranking Democrat Adam Schiff, also of California, at screen right. These were said to be duplicative of ones already issued by the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is conducting a parallel probe of allegations of collusion last year between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. Both President Trump and the Russians have denied those allegations. The subpoenas instigated by Schiff are focused on Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor, and Michael Cohen, a longtime Trump attorney. Cohen has denied colluding with the Kremlin. Flynn, through attorneys, has sought immunity in exchange for congressional testimony. The issuance of the subpoenas was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. Brett.
James, thank you. More on this with the panel. Now to the first track of that 2-track investigation. Lawmakers tell Fox we are finally going to hear from ousted FBI Chief James Comey on a host of issues. And we're told that testimony could come within days about what President Trump said to Comey about the Michael Flynn investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has that story tonight.
A source close to the investigation says fired FBI Director James Comey has spoken directly and in private to Special Counsel Robert Mueller to go over the scope of his congressional testimony that could happen as early as next week to ensure it does not interfere with or jeopardize Mueller's probe. A former Justice Department official under President Bush said the process is called deconfliction.
If you're Director Mueller, you want to talk to Comey, and you also, may not want Comey to testify about everything he tells you up on the Hill. And then that's what they talk about with this deconfliction process between the Hill discovery requests and the special counsel.
The Comey memos documenting his conversations with President Trump about Russia may take center stage before the Senate Intelligence Committee after reports the president told Comey to let this go after former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn resigned. In his last public testimony, then FBI Director Comey was pressed on political interference.
If the Attorney General or senior officials at the Department of Justice opposes a specific investigation, can they halt that FBI investigation?
In theory, yes.
Has it happened?
Not in my experience. But I'm talking about a situation where we were told to stop something for a political reason. That would be a very big deal. It's not happened in my experience.
A source close to the former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn says he will provide records under subpoena to the Senate panel, adding that the committee recently narrowed its request and Flynn is now able to accommodate the committee without sacrificing his Fifth Amendment protections.
On the Hill, you get the subpoena, and it's kind of a game of chicken about whether or not you want to risk being held in contempt by a committee of Congress, or whether you want to give them the documents they want. Neither side wants necessarily a legal battle.
In another indicator that congressional probes are expanding, Michael Cohen, a longtime personal attorney for President Trump, and Boris Epshteyn, a former campaign aide, have also been contacted. In statements to Fox News, both men said the requests were overly broad. Cohen has declined to cooperate.
Asked about the upcoming congressional testimony of former FBI Director Comey, the White House spokesman Sean Spicer told reporters they are focused on the president's agenda, and going forward, they will be referring those questions to outside counsel. Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, he promised to do it in the campaign. Tonight, there are signs President Trump will withdraw the U.S. from the Paris climate change agreement. Well, the president is insisting no official decision has been made yet. Sources expect him to pull the trigger soon, at least on some level of a withdrawal or renegotiation. All this occurs against the backdrop of an incredibly tasteless video and what appeared to be a typo in a tweet that then got a very strange follow-up at the White House. All of this is day 121 of the Trump administration. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is on top of it all from the North Lawn again. Good evening, John.
Brad, good evening to you. During the election campaign, President Trump promised to bring back American manufacturing and create jobs. The question tonight, can he make good on that promise and still stay in the Paris Climate Accord? In the Oval Office with the Vietnamese Prime Minister today, President Trump wouldn't tip his hand on which way he'll go on the Paris Climate Accord, but said a decision is imminent. At the G7 meetings in Sicily last week and at the NATO summit, President Trump told America's allies he truly cares about the environment, but he's also concerned that adhering to the strict protocols of the Climate Accord could risk the U.S. falling behind nations like China and India in manufacturing and job creation.
All the burden, once again, is on the United States to adhere to things that other countries aren't willing to do. And I think this president is looking at this and saying, I'm here as the president of the United States. Is this the right thing for our country?
Well, several sources who spoke to Fox News believe the president will make a clean break from the accord. One suggested the president may seek a middle ground, withdraw from certain agreements like the Green Climate Fund, but stay in the overall framework of the deal. The possible nuance of a decision made no impact on Democrats. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeting, quote, "We must do all we can to protect our planet as well as our economic security. Withdrawing from Paris Agreement would put this in jeopardy." Even the president's allies warned against pulling out. Tesla SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, who sits on a number of White House advisory councils, tweeted, quote, "Don't know which way Paris will go, but I've done all I can to advise directly to POTUS through others in White House and via councils that we remain." When asked what he'll do if the president withdraws, Musk replied, quote, "We'll have no choice but to depart councils in that case." The president today lashed out on Twitter, ripping comedian Kathy Griffin for a photo showing her holding a mocked severed head of the president. President Trump tweeting, quote, "Kathy Griffin should be ashamed of herself. My children, especially my 11-year-old son Barron, are having a hard time with this. Sick." The photo drew a rare public rebuke from the First Lady in a statement to Fox News saying, quote, "As a mother, a wife, and a human being, that photo is very disturbing. When you consider some of the atrocities happening in the world today, a photo opportunity like this is simply wrong. It makes you wonder about the mental health of the person who did it." The president also left the nation scratching its head after sending out a bedtime tweet last night that ended with the word "covfefe." It looked like a simple typo of the word coverage, but this morning the president made a game of it, tweeting, quote, "Who can figure out the true meaning of covfefe? Enjoy." The White House press corps wondered why it took hours for the original tweet to be deleted and whether the president needed a better Twitter monitor, prompting this rather cryptic response from the press secretary.
The president and a small group of people know exactly what he meant.
The simplest explanation would have been that the president sent out a tweet with a typo and didn't notice it last night before he went to bed. But Brett, simple somehow rarely seems to apply here at the White House.
And we still don't know, covfefe, the definition.
There's no official definition, but there certainly are some creative ones out there on the internet.
And definitely on Twitter. John, thank you.
Right.
A physician from Philadelphia is in custody tonight after authorities found a rifle and a handgun in his car, plus 90 rounds of ammunition at the Trump International Hotel just down the street from the White House here in Washington. Metro Police and the Secret Service say they received a tip about 43-year-old Brian Moles just before he checked into the hotel early this morning. They say he was behaving suspiciously and was making threatening remarks. Former Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton came out swinging at a tech conference in California this afternoon, indicating who she blames for losing last fall's election. Here's a hint. Not a lot of focus on the candidate herself in those statements today. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, who covered the Clinton campaign for Fox News, shows us what happened in basically, Jennifer, Hillary Clinton Unplugged today.
Absolutely, Brett. In fact, this was Hillary Clinton as I have not seen her before. Unplugged, as you mentioned. It was as though she were laying out a case for not only why she lost the election, pointing fingers for the first time about who it was from the Trump campaign who she believes colluded with the Russians during the election, and in her words, weaponized data to tilt the election. She makes the case against New York hedge fund heiress Rebecca Mercer, whose family fortune teamed up with an analytic firm in England called Cambridge Analytica to not only affect the outcome of the Brexit vote in England, but also to help the Trump campaign. Her condition, that Trump hire Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway to run the campaign.
The Mercers did not invest all that money just for their own amusement. We know they played in Brexit, and we know that they came to Jared Kushner and basically said, we will marry our operation, which was more, as it's been described, psychographic sentiment, a lot of harvesting of Facebook information. They married content with delivery and data. And it was a potent combination. Now, the question is, where and how did the Russians get into this? And I think it's a very important question. The Russians, in my opinion, and based on the intel and counter-intel people I've talked to, could not have known how best to weaponize that information unless they had been guided. And here's
guided by Americans.
Guided by Americans and guided by people who had, polling and data information.
Clinton said her email scandal was a, quote, nothing burger. She said she and her campaign tried to get people to focus on Russian interference in the election rather than her emails. She also blamed Facebook as a key reason she lost.
And there have been some studies done since the election that if you look, let's pick Facebook, if you look at Facebook, the vast majority of the news items posted were fake. They were connected to, as we now know, the 1,000 Russian agents who were involved in delivering those messages. They were connected to the bots that are just out of control.
Clinton also took aim at the Democratic Party, saying she, quote, inherited nothing from them in terms of data analytics, adding the party was bankrupt when she got the nomination, Brett.
I mean, Jennifer, it was stunning, the level of detail on the technical side. Then going after the DNC, I mean, essentially going after President Obama, who laid it out for her campaign.
Well, that's right. In fact, she had hired many of President Obama's analytic team. That is what she had inherited. But the way she took aim not only at the DNC, she really, there was also a moment where she seemed to blame the Obama administration for not taking her and her campaign's concerns seriously about the Russian interference in the election.
None of that list told her not to show up in Wisconsin. It's pretty amazing. Jennifer, thank you very much. More on this with the panel. As their former nominee is ripping the DNC, Democrats in Washington are really trying to rally the faithful against the Trump agenda. Tonight, Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel looks at what the Democrats hope to accomplish in the next few months.
Democrats are revealing their summer playbook, trying to tap into anger their base is feeling. Texas Democrat Congressman Mark Vesey explained why he was dressed down, offering up some red meat in Dallas today.
We have to take on the President of the United States. We have to take on Paul Ryan. We have to take on Mitch McConnell. It's time for us to take our jackets off. It's time to take our ties off. And it's time to start fighting.
House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi tried to energize a labor and activist audience.
So the middle class, which is the backbone of our democracy, really depends on our activism in the resistance summer.
And Pelosi issued this call to action in order to protect Obamacare.
Say, call your member of Congress and tell him or her not to take away our health care.
Others are taking to social media.
We'll fight our hearts out up here. I mean, that's the deal. I will. I'm fighting before I wake up in the morning, and I'm still fighting when I go to bed at night.
There are also efforts to continue harping on the ongoing Russia investigations. 3 Democrat senators, Carper of Delaware, Heinrich of New Mexico, and Peters of Michigan, sent this letter to Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats earlier this month. Quote, "We write to request a review and damage assessment regarding whether any classified information may have been disclosed by the president or his senior advisors to representatives of the Russian government during a meeting in the Oval Office on May 10, 2017. At an event last night in New York with former late-night host David Letterman, Minnesota Democrat Senator Al Franken talked about, quote, some cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russians, adding, "I think everything points to that." Franken was asked about that assessment of interaction between some in the president's inner circle and Russian officials this morning.
These meetings weren't disclosed, and there's a whole bunch of these from Trump administration officials or former Trump administration officials. They aren't acting like people who have nothing to hide.
A year ago, it was the Trump campaign and Republicans attacking Hillary Clinton's handling of classified information and her use of a private email server. Perhaps a sign of lessons learned by Democrats from the 2016 campaign. Brett?
Mike, thank you. President Trump has called Afghanistan's leader to express condolences over the killing of dozens of people in a massive suicide truck bombing today in Kabul, Afghanistan. Americans are said to be among the hundreds injured. So far, no group has claimed responsibility. A massive attack added to a number of them in recent days and weeks. Correspondent John Huddy is following the story from our Middle East newsroom.
The black cloud of smoke rose from the site of one of the worst terror attacks in Kabul since 2014, and as some Afghan officials said, the worst ever in the city. 90 people were killed, more than 450 others injured, including 11 U.S. security contractors. Afghan police officials say a sewage truck loaded with explosives blew up during rush hour in the Wazir Khan district of Kabul, just outside the city's heavily fortified green zone. It happened near the German embassy, where several of its employees were injured and an Afghan security guard was killed. The Taliban denied responsibility, though the terror group has launched major attacks in Kabul recently and vowed to carry out even more. It's possible this was the work of ISIS.
Our intelligence is working to find out who exactly was behind this incident.
Today's attack comes as the White House is considering deploying an additional 5,000 troops to join the already 8,000 on the ground in Afghanistan.
It is a dangerous place, but we have the back of the Afghan people and of the government, and we want to make sure that we're doing all we can. We are heavily invested in Afghanistan, and we're heavily invested in seeing it stable.
But today's bombing raises questions if Afghan troops are up to the task of keeping their country safe and stable. The Wazir Khan district is known to be one of the most secure parts of Kabul, with numerous security checkpoints. So how a truck loaded with explosives made it through is unclear. What is clear is that as the bloodied and burned men, women, and children were carried away from the blown-out areas around the 13-foot deep bomb crater, a message was sent: no one is safe. And President Trump spoke with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani today, expressing his condolences, as mentioned, and strongly condemning the attack in Kabul. Whether or not this has any bearing on the decision to send more troops to Afghanistan, well, that remains to be seen. Brett.
John Huddy, live in our Middle East newsroom. John, thank you. Senior Pentagon officials say the U.S. has begun arming Kurdish elements within the Syrian Defense Forces. It's a move that has outraged U.S. ally Turkey, which considers the Kurds terrorists. But U.S. officials say the Kurds are the best fighting force against ISIS inside Syria. The weapons include small arms, ammunition, and vehicles. The Kurds are preparing for what is expected to be a long, bloody battle to try to recapture the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa. Up next, we will show you the moment of impact when a U.S. interceptor missile shot down an ICBM. Pentagon officials say they're not concerned about the Russian firing of 4 cruise missiles at an ISIS base inside Syria. U.S. military commanders say it was warned about in advance by Moscow and that the attack is not regarded as a significant event. The missiles were launched from a Russian warship and a submarine in the Mediterranean. There is no word on the result of that operation. Complete obliteration. That's what Pentagon officials are calling the destruction of a mock ICBM warhead by a U.S. interceptor missile yesterday. New video today from the Defense Department shows the moment the interceptor knocked that missile out of the sky. Tuesday's test comes amid growing concern over North Korea's ability to deliver a nuclear bomb to American or allied territory. The admiral in charge called it an incredible accomplishment. One arms control advocate says it was a $244 million baby step. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations says the administration believes China is using back-channel networking with North Korea to try to put a stop to the country's nuclear and ballistic missile testing. Tonight, correspondent Doug McKelway looks at whether China is really making a difference.
We're going to be discussing trade. We're going to be discussing North Korea.
It is the subject rattling leaders across the Asian Pacific region and beyond. On Monday, President Trump tweeted, quote, "North Korea has shown great disrespect for their neighbor China by shooting off yet another ballistic missile. But China is trying hard." But trying hard to do what? Despite overtures of U.S. goodwill and a gracious invitation to Mar-a-Lago, some analysts believe China's President Xi may be trying to pull both North and South Korea into China's orbit at the expense of U.S. hopes of reining in the North's Kim Jong-un. South Korea's new President Moon, who is said to be seeking better relations with China, lashed out yesterday after his own defense ministry failed to notify him that the Pentagon had sent 4 more batteries of THAAD, Theater High-Altitude Area Defense Missiles, to South Korea. China is also wary of those missiles, fearing the U.S. may place them in Japan, too, as a part of a NATO-like alliance of Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. to block Chinese ambitions.
It's another symptom of the fact that relations between the U.S. and South Korea are troubled today and are going to become ever more troubled as we see the events on the Korean Peninsula unfold.
In addition, China and South Korea are pursuing new trade and cultural agreements. That, as it becomes clear China's moratorium on the purchase of North Korean coal exports have largely been a ruse.
The Chinese bought North Korean coal in February after the announcement, in March, in April, and in May. And also the Chinese have been buying minerals that the UN Security Council resolutions prohibit North Korea from selling. So China's been playing a duplicitous game here.
In fact, in the first quarter of 2017, China-North Korea trade was up 37.4%. Yet the U.S. remains hopeful that it will be Chinese influence that ultimately gets North Korea to halt its nuclear program.
The administration believes that China is doing back-channel networking with North Korea in a way that's getting them to try and stop the nuclear testing.
But many experts agree that only U.S. action will force North Korea's hand, whether it's some concessions, such as removing those THAAD missiles from South Korea, or tougher action, such as sanctioning those Chinese banks that help to fund North Korea's nuclear program. Either way, time is running short. Brett?
Doug McKelway live at the State Department. Doug, thank you. We are learning new details tonight about the suicide bomber who attacked a concert venue in Manchester, England last week. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott has the latest from London.
Police are zeroing in on what could be deadly remnants of last week's Manchester terror attack. Security teams blanketing a neighborhood in the southern part of the city, which British-Libyan attacker Salman Abedi frequented in the days running up to the concert blast, which left 22 dead and over 100 injured. He had a blue suitcase in tow, which might have contained explosive materials.
We never faced like this before, you know. So it's like scary, you know. It's really scary, you know.
This, as police now say, many of the Manchester bomber's movements and actions in the days before the attack were carried out alone. Investors think he purchased core components of his backpack bomb and possibly assembled it himself. Still, the deadly precision of the attack leads experts to think Abedi had training. He had been in Libya just prior to the attack. His father and brother, now detained, live there. There are ISIS camps there, and the terror group claimed responsibility.
Actually carrying out the attack takes a lot of expertise, and the sort of planning that we've seen going into this attack indicates that it might have had a little bit more than just a lone wolf who was radicalized.
And so, as the mourning in Manchester continues, authorities are still looking at whether a network helped out. Police are now holding 11 people. 50 injured remain in hospitals. A benefit concert for attack victims and families will be held Sunday in Manchester. It will feature the young performer whose concert was targeted last week, Ariana Grande, along with a big lineup of stars and groups.
It's wonderful the way every single person in Manchester is really working towards making this happen.
The Manchester police chief does acknowledge some victim families have their reservations about the concert, coming less than 2 weeks after the bombing. Feelings and more raw in the terror-struck British city. Bret.
Greg Palgott in London. Greg, thanks. Back here in the U.S., comedian and sometimes CNN host Kathy Griffin is apologizing for appearing in a video and various photos holding what looked like the bloody, severed head of President Trump. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, reports tonight it's not the first time Hollywood has crossed the line in its treatment of the president.
Kathy Griffin has apologized for her photo shoot with a bloody mask of President Trump's face, but that was not enough. CNN, after initially saying it was evaluating the situation, said this afternoon it has terminated her agreement to continue co-hosting its New Year's Eve specials. Griffin's twisted attempt at humor in an age of all too real ISIS beheadings suggests she expected applause for joining in the Hollywood hatred against Donald Trump.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Madonna paid no price for sharing this violent fantasy. Meryl Streep used the Golden Globes to accuse the president of bullying and humiliating people. Jimmy Kimmel ripped Trump at the Oscars, saying he tweets during his 5 a.m. bowel movement. Stephen Colbert offered only a non-apology for this crude sex joke about the president.
In fact, the only thing your mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's holster.
Bill Maher even told an incest joke about the president and Ivanka Trump. Kathy Griffin chose to take down the gory photo.
The image is too disturbing. I understand how it offends people, and I beg for your forgiveness. I went too far. I made a mistake, and I was wrong.
Some news outlets had been on the fence. USA Today said a photo shoot with a prop made to look like a decapitated head of President Trump, art or evil. The president tweeted that Griffin should be ashamed of herself and that this caused problems for his 11-year-old son Barron. Melania Trump said that as a mother, wife, and human being, that photo was very disturbing. Even Chelsea Clinton called it vile and wrong. CNN did call the photo disgusting and offensive while weighing whether to drop Griffin. Her New Year's Eve co-host, Anderson Cooper, tweeted, "For the record, I am appalled by the photo shoot Kathy Griffin took part in. It is clearly disgusting and completely inappropriate." This is not the first time a Republican president's likeness has been used in such a grotesque manner. HBO's Game of Thrones apologized 5 years ago after a backlash for putting a model of George W. Bush's head on a spike. It's become routine for celebrities to win praise on the left by trashing Donald Trump, often in highly offensive ways. The backlash against Kathy Griffin makes clear there is still a line of decency that no one should cross. Bret?
Howie, thank you. The purported street boss of the Lucchese crime family and 18 other people have been indicted in a New York organized crime investigation that includes allegations of fraud in a $25 million hospital expansion and in other public building projects. Murder, extortion, and drug dealing are among the other crimes cited in this indictment, unsealed today. Among the nicknames of those charged, Wonder Boy, Joey Glasses, Spanish Carmine, and Paulie Roast Beef. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 21. The S&P 500 fell 1. The Nasdaq was off 5. Up next,
This was the biggest nothing burger ever. I never said I was a perfect candidate, and I certainly have never said I ran perfect campaigns, but I don't know who is or did. Mm-hmm. And at some point, it sort of bleeds over into misogyny. I take responsibility for every decision I made, but that's not why I lost. So I think it's important that we learn the real lessons from this last campaign, because the forces that we are up against are not just interested in influencing our elections and our politics. They're going after our economy, and they're going after our unity as a nation.
Well, Hillary Clinton unplugged at a tech conference out in California. The nothing burger was the emails, how she handled her emails and the coverage of that. She went into great detail about linkage and Russian bots and down into the weeds of the Mercers and the funding of Republican data efforts, and then turned the guns on the DNC and Democrats.
So I'm now the nominee of the Democratic Party. I inherit nothing from the Democratic Party.
What do you mean nothing?
I mean, it was bankrupt. It was on the verge of insolvency. Its data was mediocre to poor, non-existent, wrong. I had to inject money into it.
This is the DNC.
The DNC to keep it going.
Now, remember, this is President Obama's DNC. So in essence, she's pointing the blame at President Obama there at the election. This is quite something. If you look at the last 3 Democratic nominees running for president, all 3 of them believe they were cheated out of an election. Hillary Clinton is talking about it much more than Al Gore or John Kerry at this point. Let's start there. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. Editor-in-chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingraham, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Jonah.
There's a lot one can focus on here. I think short of getting 5 o'clock shadow and wearing wingtips on the beach, her transformation into full Nixonian bitterness is complete. The idea that literally every single possible variable is to blame except for her and her actions was really kind of remarkable. It's kind of mesmerizing watching this thing. And, you know, we forget that this is a side of Hillary that's always been there. In her memoirs, she writes about this vast conspiracy that Chief Justice Rehnquist was leading against her and her husband. This is the woman who's kept, her personal Beria, Sidney Blumenthal, employed for decades, who's a conspiracy monger. And it's this sort of Manichaean worldview that she is a force for truth and justice, and all of these evil forces are to blame for anything bad that ever happens to her.
Susan.
You have to wonder who this does any good for, because it doesn't do any good for Hillary Clinton and her reputation and kind of her standing. She doesn't look big in this interview. She looks small, and it can't help the Democrats. You know, there are a lot of people looking backwards at this election for the Democrats with the congressional inquiries into Russian meddling, but Democrats also need to start looking forward to what they stand for, and we know from these special elections it's not enough to just run against Trump. You need to have a positive message, and it's not clear what direction Democrats are going, what they stand for, but we know that Hillary Clinton finding fault with everybody except herself for losing the last election does not help her.
And to the credit of some of the interviewers, they pressed her on a couple of issues. For example, here's one of the questions about the Goldman Sachs speeches she gave for a lot of money.
Why did you do those? I don't.
Why do you have Goldman Sachs here?
Because they pay us.
They paid me. When you're the Secretary of State, people want to hear what you talk about. The most common thing that I talked about in all those speeches was the hunt for bin Laden. Men got paid for the speeches they made. I got paid for the speeches I made. And it was used, and I thought it was unfairly used and all of that, but it was part of the background music.
Laura.
Well, I think that was the behind closed doors speech where it was like open markets, open borders. That was one of the lines, of paraphrasing it. But my gosh, Hillary she does not, to me, look well. She doesn't look like her, like the moments of the campaign, she was kind of having fun, laughing, vibrant. I know she lost, and it's unpleasant to lose. Losing is not fun. But the inability to see the lack of a campaign that connected with blue-collar Americans who had been left behind by both Republicans and Democrats, after all this time, with all of her education and all the help she got from CNN and the DNC, who colluded together to help her. I don't know why she's complaining about the DNC. They were hurting Bernie. They weren't hurting her, so that was odd. Her idea that the election, I guess, was rigged. They made fun of Donald Trump for saying the election was rigged. Remember after that Colorado caucus vote, they were all ridiculing him, but I mean, the Democrats in the left and Hillary Clinton, combine them all together, throw in Elizabeth Warren, she's next maybe, they're like the new tinfoil hat conspiracy contingent. It's all a conspiracy. It's all Russia. It's all misogyny. It's all Black Lives Matter. Whatever it is, it's never about the substance. That America has fallen behind in the middle class, and they need real solutions.
I mean, listen, there were people, Debbie Dingell from Michigan, others who were sending up red flares saying Bernie Sanders is connecting in a place like Michigan more than you are during the election, and that was not discussed today.
Well, I don't think she's capable of discussing anything about the election in a way that makes, anything other than sympathy for her. I mean, that she has made herself pathetic. It was said of the Bourbons, they never learned anything, they never forgot anything. She was saying the same stuff about the vast right-wing conspiracy, which is essentially what she is talking about here, naming all the elements, including as a kind of novelty, the Russians this time. This is the vast right-wing conspiracy she spoke about at the beginning of the Lewinsky scandal, when, in fact, she and her husband lied for months about an event that really happened, and they denied it. She has never changed, and she seems incapable of understanding that she lost a humiliating election that was almost unlosable, and that was because she never knew why she was running. The pathos of her actually sending emails to her staff in the middle of a campaign after essentially being on the road for 8 years and begging them to come up with a theme. If you don't know why you're running for president, you shouldn't be running for president.
I want to turn to the investigation, the two tracks, as we talked about earlier in the show. You have the Russia investigation and what the Trump campaign did or did not do. And you also have the leak and also surveillance investigation. Susan, today, Fox News confirmed that the FBI, CIA, and NSA served with subpoenas. And sources say the subpoenas reference unmasking, and specifically the names of figures of interest, 3 Obama-era officials. You have National Security Advisor Susan Rice, as well as John Brennan, former CIA director, and the new one is Samantha Power, former UN ambassador, had not previously been mentioned in this, and it's raising a lot of eyebrows in this unmasking investigation.
So very appropriate to look into whether there was improper action in trying to unmask the Americans who were picked up by surveillance of foreigners. That's certainly going forward. I do think that is a secondary investigation in seriousness to the investigation into what Russia did in meddling in a U.S. election. But I think both tracks are going to proceed not only with the FBI investigation, but also with the inquiries on the Hill. I think we're going to be hearing a lot about both things.
And we are days away, we're told, Jonah, from Jim Comey testifying up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, which should be fascinating. Comey said in testimony to Congress that he's never been told to stop an investigation, and that's never happened in his experience. And a lot of people are expecting him to say something a little different. At least that's what those original leaks from Comey sounded like he was going to be saying. And I think it's a good thing. He should speak before Congress. And the same thing with these subpoenas. There is so much conjecture. I think sometimes the White House doesn't help itself by breaking out the smoke machines when there may not be any fire, but get people to talk to Congress under oath before the American people, and let's move on past this stuff. But you have to go through the steps first.
And it was interesting that Carter Page was called up there. Democrats really wanted to hear from him, and then suddenly he wasn't.
He's not going to deliver what they apparently want. I mean, Carter Page has made himself available to testify, and to Jonah's point, Comey himself, along with John Brennan and others, have said there is no evidence of collusion. And we do have to find out if our government was essentially turned into a political weapon against individuals for their political associations, whether to Trump or to associates of Trump, and tracked and perhaps ultimately an attempt to intimidate or harass. Susan Rice is not testifying. She refuses to testify before Congress. She has been asked to. Jared Kushner has said he'd make himself available to anyone who wants to talk to him. It's interesting. Why won't Susan Rice talk?
Hillary Clinton is obviously convinced of the linkage, the collusion, even though there's not evidence that we've seen. She talked about it at length today, about the linkage, and she believes the Trump campaign's there. Here are former Clinton CIA director and former Obama CIA director, James Woolsey. There are a lot of things I've seen, I think have been disclosed too much, and I think there's the real scandal here. So much disclosed, it makes it hard for the secrecy that's essential for the operation of the U.S. government in these areas to continue. I think people who have broken these tacit and formal agreements and taken classified information and turned it loose are basically traitors to the country. He worked for the Clinton administration. Then you have Michael Morrell in the Obama administration, was the acting CIA director, about the Kushner story on the Washington Post. That is not sourcing chain in which I would put a great deal of confidence. I spent a career watching the media get a significant portion of intelligence-related stories wrong. So the bottom line, we should all be very careful in saying what is a fact on which to base analysis here. The real facts may be different. Just a perspective of two former Democratic CIA directors.
It's democratic, that is the key word. These are not partisans, they are not Trumpites by any means, and what they're speaking for is the institutions. And they're basically saying you might have a romantic notion of everybody being a deep throat and uncovering some terrible scandal, as in Watergate, but if you treat the oath to maintain these secrets that cavalierly, you're undermining the national security of the United States. You better be damn sure this is a great crime that you are leaking about. Anything less than that, you're really betraying your country. So I would take what they say rather seriously and not romanticize people who are leaking this information.
We will cover all elements of all tracks, and if there's there, you'll see it here. Next up, will President Trump pull the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement?
Very soon.
Are you ready for getting out?
You're going to find out very soon. I'm hearing from a lot of people. Both ways. Yeah, both ways, believe it.
Are you leading the direction, sir?
I'm hearing from a lot of people both ways.
Hearing from a lot of people both ways on the Paris climate deal, the agreement that is reported to believe that the president's going to pull out of that. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, doesn't think that's a good idea. Many Democrats expressing that today, saying we must do all we can to protect our planet as well as our economic security. Withdrawing from the Paris Agreement would put this in jeopardy. Back with the panel. Susan.
Well, you know, we are way out on a limb saying he's going to pull the U.S. out of this treaty, but we should maybe remember what happened with NAFTA, where he was going to pull us out of NAFTA, and at the very last minute got appeals from the heads of Canada and Mexico and decided to renegotiate instead. So I think we ought to learn to be a little more cautious until we actually hear the words out of his mouth. But, you know, it's not just Democrats who are criticizing Paris. There is a global consensus, including the leaders of China and Europe, our traditional allies in Europe, not in China, who think it is a serious matter for him to pull out of this and the wrong thing to do. He has, one more point, effectively already pulled out, though, by taking steps to roll back Obama-era climate regulations that would make it now almost impossible for the United States to reach the goals that President Obama agreed to 2 years ago.
Yeah, we should point out that in our reporting we've caveated it with that, waiting for the expectation. But it could be something short of a full withdrawal. In other words, a renegotiation, some kind of redoing it. Right, Laura?
There could be a scenario under which they say we will consider renegotiations at a further date, at a later date. In other words, kind of pushing it off for the time being. A lot of people would love him to try to kick it over to the Senate. Let's have this be a treaty. You guys vote on it. Because I have serious doubts, but the country seems kind of split on this. But I think that this fundamental question, it goes back to why he ran in this campaign. He was about returning more power to the people. And what these types of international accords invariably do, and this one does, I believe, it centers more power, American power, in unaccountable international institutions, governing bodies, etc. And it means less power for individual Americans. And our economy is going to be hurt by it. We know that. China doesn't really have to do much except show its virtue in reducing emissions by 2030. So it hurts the United States, our economy, and our sovereignty. He campaigned against this, and I think ultimately he'll probably go to the country and explain his vote one way or another.
Charles.
I think that would all be true if it weren't a toothless treaty. It has no enforcement mechanism. It's all voluntary. People are supposed to adhere to certain limits, self-imposed. That's the problem with it. If we had a real agreement where China and India, the real polluters for CO2, and we and the EU had the firm limits enforceable, then, and if you were willing to say, I'm not a climate believer, but I'm a bit of a skeptic, but nonetheless, prudence would dictate that we do something, then it would make sense. Right now, it makes no sense. The Chinese essentially have a free ride for 15 years. The Indians have announced that they're going to increase CO2 emissions. They're going to triple them from coal between now and 2030. We're the ones who are going to have to adhere to these limits. And the fact is that technology is going to determine it. We have lower emissions from our coal plants than we had since 1992, a quarter of a century. And that's not regulation. It's not the UN imposing it. That's the rise of natural gas and fracking.
Jonah.
Now, I agree with Charles about the sort of scam of this thing. It's politically very, very important for a lot of sort of establishment, elites, the Davos crowd and all the rest. It's very important for environmentalists because it is a way of generating sort of political support to fight climate change. But the actual nuts and bolts of the treaty are not very strong or powerful. And I like the idea that, Laura mentioned of sending it over to the Senate. The whole reason why Donald Trump can get rid of this with a swoop of a pen is because Barack Obama didn't put it through as a treaty. He did it as an executive order.
Because it wouldn't have passed.
Because it wouldn't have passed. But, why, we should not be entering into these grand global arrangements based upon the whims of a single president, one way or the other.
The U.S. ambassador to the UN says, Nikki Haley, we care as much about the environment as we do about jobs. There's a way to balance it. You don't have to have one or the other. So, could tell you something. When we come back, the return of Special Report Online.